Of the D-Day invasion in Normandy, France during World War II. Hundreds of men and women from the Mid-Ohio Valley had a role to play during the invasion. Our Logan Riggenbaugh talked to a local historian and the American Legion for this week's This Is Home.
This is Home, sponsored by A1 Heating and Cooling and TB Dentistry.
156,000 Allied soldiers stormed the beaches of Normandy to break into the heart of Nazi-occupied Europe. Of those 156,000 soldiers, hundreds of them were from the Mid-Ohio Valley. Scott Britton, the executive director of the Castle Museum, says his high school history teacher, Vincent Scragg, was in the Navy and worked on the ship that made 16 trips across the English Channel to take soldiers to Normandy. Scott says he never told people about his experience during D-Day.
As the case was with many of those World War II soldiers, most people didn't even know about their service. Many of the students and my fellow classmates never knew that he served in World War II or Korea. He went back in for a second enlistment in the Korean War. We didn't know until literally we read it in his obituary about his service, and particularly the D-Day trips across the English Channel.
Greg Burdett, commander of the American Legion Post 15 in Parkersburg, shared that his father-in-law, Donzel Walbrown, fought during D-Day. He was in the artillery and made his way through France, where he was stationed until the end of the war. Greg says it's important to remember the soldiers that gave their lives during D-Day.
We need to remember all the people, the troops that did not survive that. They were somewhere, and they can't get the numbers right, but somewhere between 4,000 and 10,000 people lost their lives.
Another soldier, Delbert Williams, was in the 331st Infantry that landed on Omaha Beach. While fighting, he was cut under his eye by a bullet. He was wounded a second time when he was shot while fighting in Germany. Greg says while the invasion was instrumental in ending the war, it didn't make it less tragic.
Just that it helped end World War II, and just hopefully we never get into another conflict like that where it's drawn out so long.
There are currently 5 soldiers buried in the American cemetery that overlooks Omaha Beach. One of those soldiers was Roger Lane. He was looking through German bunkers once the invasion was over. The bunker was booby-trapped and blew up, killing Lane and many other soldiers. Reporting from Marietta, I'm Logan Riggenbaugh for WTAP News.